consequences for people.
That's it. That's it exactly. And the total lack of an ability to have a reasoned debate without just being like smeared as a propagandist is
don't read the comments.
It is a terrifying moment. And you know, there's a couple things that do give me some heart, which is number one, even though like I can't really blame the people who can't understand seeing it another way, because the propaganda that is coming from every network, really like almost across the board, is very strong, and it's very hard to avoid that. So I have sympathy for that perspective. But even so, a poll just came out that had, from NBC News, they buried this at the very end of their write-up of the poll. Public's now 50-50 split on continuing aid to Ukraine. So people are questioning, even though they're being fed so much propaganda. I think that is a credit to the rise of independent media. I think it's also a credit to the fact that they don't fucking trust the mainstream press anymore.
Both things, but because of independent media, the trust is informed. Or the lack of trust, rather.
Right. It's not just knee jerk. I hope. I mean, that's my hope looking at those numbers. Yeah.
I think your hope is 100% correct. I think you're right. I think you guys are very important. Glenn Greenwald, very important. Jimmy Dore, very important. Kyle Kalinske, very important. People who are real people that actually have done the homework and are going over the details and can inform people. Because there's so many people out there. Like, I talked to Dave Smith about the history of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I was like, what? And he informed me about the coup in 2014. I'm like, my God.
There's a lot of backstory.
And then we played the video on the Colbert Show, the old Colbert Show. Which is just fucking
like Gideon something, the guy from the Times, where he was like,
he's got a book. He's selling a book. And in the book, he's comparing Russia and Ukraine to Batman and Robin. And he's like, Ukraine is Robin, and we want to take Robin and bring him over to our side. And it's like this open secret.
They're just openly talking. You know, there were cables from that actually WikiLeaks released, and a friend who's a great journalist, Branko Marcetic, who's been looking at the Ukraine conflict with a critical eye. He sorted through these cables, and he found all of these diplomatic cables from the prior era where you had NATO allies, you had U.S. officials who were all saying, hey guys, Russia has red lines here with regard to Ukraine, and floating NATO membership with Ukraine is a real violation of their hard red lines, and we're very fearful. And they laid out exactly the trajectory that we could find ourselves on. Now, that doesn't deny Russia agency or, you know, Putin and the Kremlin agency for invading. No one made them do that. However, it is to say that, you know, there was a time when you were allowed to acknowledge that U.S. policy could lead to this exact event. And now when you even suggest that us, you know, floating NATO membership with Ukraine and saying that they were going to be made apart, that some of these things were exacerbating, they crossed the red line and, you know, created a situation that was incredibly tense where this is the predictable outcome. Again, you're not allowed to talk about that now.
Well, it's also like, to bring back the chess analogy, is if you looked at war and you ignored the human casualties and the horrors and the fact that it should absolutely be avoided at all costs and all human deaths are valuable and bombing apartment buildings and all the horrible shit, it's terrible and evil. But this isn't like that. We are being fed a narrative that Russia made a big move and there was no other move.
Right.
And when we find out about the moving of weapons closer to Russia, the discussion of them joining NATO, and you realize Russia is getting moved on. There's moves. Now, you absolutely be correct in saying the correct response is not blowing up apartment buildings, starting a war, and invading a country. You're right. But this is not an unprovoked situation.
It didn't just come out of nowhere from a madman.
We're not getting this narrative on television. This is a new time. And the only way to get this discussion is you guys. It's people like you. And that's what's so fucking important about today. And that's what's so dangerous about censorship. And that's what's so dangerous about these partisan ideas where you're willing to absolutely ignore good point that the other side says, because then you would give them some sort of credit in winning this ideological bullshit game we're all playing.
That is so well said.
It drives me nuts, especially on corruption. You know, you were talking about censorship, but corruption is a great one where everybody wants to talk about Hunter Biden on the right. I would love, listen, we can talk about Hunter Biden all day. We've been covering
We have covered Hunter Biden extensively.
He's a guy who got hooked on drugs.
Right.
Yes.
Okay?
And likes to get his dick sucked.
And who
A lot.
doesn't?
Right.
That's not what the problem is. You know, it's just revealing a very corrupt system that everyone wants to ignore.
Exactly. And then we were like, hey, let's talk about Jared Kushner. And then a lot of people on the writers, I'm like, hey, you know, this guy, it's actually great. There are internal Saudi documents where he asked the Saudi Royal Kingdom Fund or whatever for $1 billion investment in his new fund, private equity fund, right after he leaves the White House. The internal emails are like, I don't think this guy's a very good investor. I'm not sure this would be a good use of our capital. And MBS, the Crown Prince, is like, give him the money. They're like, he intervened, send him the $1 billion
personally
to give
Jared
this guy
his $2 billion. I think it was
maybe $2 billion.
$2 billion for his fund.
Yeah.
That's a baller friend to have.
Yeah, but if you're on the right, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Hunter Biden and his laptop, and of course the Democrats. We had Ted Lieu, congressman, on. This is back in the old days at the Hill at Rising, but I'll never forget. We were pressing him on Hunter Biden, these boards that he was on, and the money he was getting, whatever. He's like, people sit on boards and they get paid money. Like, it was so part of the Washington, like the water that they swim in. He couldn't even conceive that it was a problem. I mean, now it may not be illegal, but that's an issue in and of itself. The fact that he could just hand wave away.
Well, it's semi-legal.
Oh, no, it's just straight legal.
Yeah,
that's
but
that's the crazy part.
It's sketchy. It's legal, but it's sketchy.
Yes.
Yeah.
But to your point about, you know, censorship and the like total lack of willingness to challenge your own side's narrative. Did you just see this Columbia Journalism Review report that came out about Russiagate? Saagar and I were looking at it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It's really long, in-depth. I mean, it's overdue, right? It's like way after the fact. But I think this is one of the first, certainly mainstream, and CJR is as mainstream as they come, mainstream attempts to actually go back through the Russiagate narrative, where it started, how it was sold to the American people, and all of the lies and especially the omissions. And they take a really hard look at the New York Times as kind of the main player in the story. There were other villains as well, but the New York Times was the main player.